He punched a black woman right in the middle of a police precinct. He didn't know who she was. He didn't ask why she was there. He saw her skin color and struck. Moments later, just as the room seemed to settle into silence, a voice cut through like thunder. "She's the newly appointed chief of police." No one could breathe. No one could believe it. And the man who threw that punch became the face of a system rotted to its core. Arlington, a southern U.S. city where people claimed equality had already been achieved. But what was the reality? Discrimination still seeped through the station halls. Contempt, arrogance, hidden behind words like protocol and procedure. That morning, Ayanna Brooks, a black woman, walked into the police department. No name tag, no badge, dressed simply. No one knew who she was. No one welcomed her. And one man, Lieutenant Scott Delaney, did something no one could have predicted. He punched her in the face, in front of dozens of fellow officers. He claimed it was to maintain order. But that single punch shattered everything: honor, careers, and a system built on silence. If you've ever believed that truth only surfaces with evidence, this story will show you otherwise. Because sometimes truth reveals itself through one unflinching look. And this is where we begin the journey of that woman. A woman who didn't need power to earn respect, but used her pain to shake an entire system awake. Ayanna Brooks stepped through the glass doors of the Arlington Police Department on a crisp, chilly morning. Jeans, a plain button-down shirt, short, neatly styled curls. She looked like any ordinary citizen coming in for routine paperwork. No one recognized her. No name tag, no badge, no assistant by her side. And that was intentional. Ayanna wanted to see it for herself, how a black woman would be treated when she wasn't carrying power on her shoulders. At the front desk, a young officer scrolled through his phone, barely looking up. A middle-aged black man had been sitting in the waiting area for over 15 minutes. No one approached. No one cared. Ayanna stepped forward and politely asked for assistance. The officer glanced at her, head to toe, his eyes dripping with judgment. "You here to file for benefits or report someone?" His tone was flat, dismissive, completely lacking respect. Moments later, a tall man approached, his uniform decorated with the insignia of a lieutenant. Scott Delaney. Cold eyes, a voice that didn't ask. It commanded. "What are you doing here?" Ayanna remained calm. "I'd like to speak with Human Resources." Delaney let out a dry chuckle. "We don't entertain community activists here. If you want to give speeches, find a seminar." Laughter rippled through nearby officers. Smirks, eye rolls, disdain. None of them knew the woman standing before them would soon determine all their futures. None of them realized that their every word, their every smirk, would be replayed on national television within days. Because Ayanna wasn't just the new chief of police. She was the final test, a living reckoning for a system that had long since rotted from the inside out. Ayanna Brooks once believed that when a black woman was appointed chief of police, it wasn't just a personal victory. It was a sign of a new era. She thought, this is the moment to change the culture, to show the entire city that justice has no color. But her very first steps inside the Arlington precinct shattered that belief. Not just because of the cold stares, not just because of the smirks echoing down the hallway, but because of how the people wearing blue, the very ones trained to protect others, openly treated her like trash. Lieutenant Scott Delaney, the commanding officer on duty that morning, didn't just ignore her. He mocked her, belittled her, and delivered words that teetered between insult and interrogation. "You here to apply for a job or just looking to stir something up?" he said with a smug shrug. "We don't serve disgruntled citizens every day, you know." But the most painful part? Not a single officer intervened. Not one glance of disapproval. Just silence. And complicity. Ayana stood there, appearing like any ordinary citizen. But in reality, she was the highest-ranking leader in the department. She had once believed this system could heal itself, could reform from within. But that day, inside her own headquarters, she realized something deeper. Sometimes, to clean a house, you have to start with what's rotting the fastest. The punch came without warning. Have time to. Ayana didn't flinch. Lieutenant Scott Delaney's fist slammed into her left cheek, sending her stumbling backward before she collapsed onto the cold, hard floor. The crowded room fell into absolute silence. Some officers still hadn't processed what had just happened. Others were still laughing because they thought she was just another unruly woman getting put in her place. But Ayana didn't stay down. She pushed herself up, slowly, calmly, without a sound. Blood traced the edge of her mouth, but her eyes, sharp as razors, never wavered. She locked eyes with Delaney, not as a victim, but with the gaze of someone who had just identified the rot at the center of the system. Delaney stood there, chest heaving, his eyes starting to flicker with confusion, because she wasn't reacting the way he expected. No screaming, no pleading, just silence, and the stillness of a mountain about to collapse. Then, something no one expected. The door to Human Resources swung open. A middle-aged staffer stepped out, a file folder in hand. He caught one glimpse of Ayana and froze, his face drained of color. Then he shouted, "Oh my God! That's the new police chief. Do you realize what you've just done?" The entire room stood in stunned disbelief. Laughter died mid-air. Smirks cracked into panic. Delaney's throat went dry, and the officers who had stood by, who had laughed with him, could only bow their heads, because they all understood. That moment had just changed the fate of their entire department. "No, this is a misunderstanding," Scott Delaney screamed, his eyes darting wildly between panic and rage. "I didn't know who she was. If I had known." But Ayana Brooks didn't need to hear the rest. She didn't need an apology, didn't need some last-minute explanation, because she knew. If she had just been another black woman that day, would anyone have said a word about that punch? Ayana stepped into the center of the room. Her voice wasn't loud, but each word fell like a hammer. "Lieutenant Scott Delaney, you just assaulted a civilian inside a police station, and the fact that you didn't know she was your superior officer, that only makes it worse." She paused, just long enough for the weight to land. Then, firmly, "Cuff him." Silence. No one moved. A few officers exchanged glances, uncertain, uneasy. Ayana's voice cut through again. "I said cuff Lieutenant Scott Delaney. That's a direct order from the Chief of Police." Two younger officers stepped forward, slowly, but with purpose. They approached Delaney, the man who used to be the king of the unit, turned him around, pulled his arms back, and locked the cuffs in place. Click. No one said a word. But in that moment, a false symbol of power was completely dismantled. Delaney erupted. "This is a mistake. I was set up. This is politics." Ayana didn't flinch. She replied with just one sentence. "The only mistake was thinking you could abuse power and never pay for it." And for the first time, power didn't belong to the loudest voice in the room. It belonged to the one who stood her ground. Silence. No more laughter. No more smug glances. Just a room full of people, weighing heavy like a courtroom with no words. Ayana Brooks stood still. No shouting, no resistance. Her presence, her eyes, and the bruise on her cheek said it all. An older officer bowed his head. A young female cop bit her lip, trying to hide her discomfort. Those who once looked away as Delaney mocked her could no longer raise their eyes. Ayanna looked at each of them, not with rage, not with scorn, but in her gaze there was one unspoken question. When he threw that punch, where were you? No one dared to answer. I didn't think it was this bad, Ayanna finally said. Her voice didn't shake, but there was a small fracture beneath the steel, not because of the punch, but because of every look that turned away, every laugh that joined in. She turned toward the door, where Scott Delaney had just been led out in handcuffs. I don't need you to like me, but if you don't have the courage to speak up for what's right, then you don't deserve to wear this uniform. Her words weren't an order. They were truth, and truth hurts. In that moment, every officer in that room saw themselves in a mirror. Not a mirror on the wall, but one reflected through the woman who had just risen from the floor. She didn't fall apart. She didn't scream. She simply stood and forced an entire system to confront itself. Within 48 hours of the incident at headquarters, a full-scale internal investigation was launched. Lieutenant Scott Delaney, once considered the backbone of the department, suddenly became the first exposed link in a rusted machine. Old case files were reopened. Complaints that had been ignored for years were now being heard with real seriousness for the first time. And the truth that emerged shook the entire city.
He'd been named
Delaney
in
had
at least
just
12
12 prior complaints, ranging from racial discrimination to abuse of power against both black civilians and black colleagues. Every one of them had been buried, dismissed for lack of evidence, or worse, written off as insufficient grounds for action, because the people who reviewed those complaints were his friends. 5 more officers were suspended within the first week. 3 were accused of deliberate cover-ups. 2, the loudest laughers during Ayanna's assault, were caught on internal camera footage doctoring reports to protect Delaney. Ayanna didn't need to make a scene. She simply turned the lights on and exposed everything that had been festering in the dark. I didn't come here to clean up, Ayanna declared at an emergency meeting with the full command staff. I came to tear it down. She didn't seek revenge. She rebuilt, not just replacing one man, but dismantling an entire culture of silent rot. For the first time in years, the word accountability was no longer just a slogan. It became action. And for the first time, people witnessed a black woman confront an entire system, armed with nothing but truth and justice. The video of that fateful punch spread like wildfire. Within a single night, it became a national headline. No longer just an isolated incident. It was now living proof of the corruption hiding behind the badge. Black female police chief assaulted by white officer and stands tall. That headline appeared across every major outlet: CNN, The Washington Post, MSNBC. The call for police reform was reignited. Protests erupted from Boston to Oakland. But this time, it wasn't just rage. It was resolve. Justice for Ayanna. Reform the system. Thousands of signs held high, even in the rain. And right at the heart of the storm, Ayanna Brooks stepped calmly onto the podium outside City Hall. With a voice clear and unwavering, she declared, I didn't come here to maintain a broken system. I came to change it, from the roots up. The plaza erupted in applause. Lieutenant Scott Delaney was immediately fired. His case was handed to the district attorney. He was formally charged with assault, abuse of authority, and obstruction. But Ayanna didn't stop there. The entire hiring, training, and disciplinary system of the Arlington Police Department was suspended for review. An independent oversight board was formed, including civil rights lawyers, community leaders, and justice reform experts. She also called for the re-examination of all dismissed complaints from the past 10 years, because silence may have been protecting crimes. Within 3 months, 9 major reforms were implemented. A department once known as a symbol of resistance to change became the epicenter of reform nationwide. And leading that transformation was the woman who had once been punched in the face inside her own station, Ayanna Brooks, who turned public humiliation into the sharpest counterattack justice had ever seen. After the media storm, many expected Ayanna Brooks to compromise, to dial things down, to smooth it over. But she didn't. She pushed the conversation to a whole new level, with actions that couldn't be undone. On her first day back at the office, Ayanna signed into effect the Internal Integrity Code, a new department-wide mandate headlined by 3 bold declarations. 1. All acts of racial, gender-based, or bias-driven misconduct will be investigated independently. 2. No officer may remain passive upon witnessing misconduct. 3. Every voice matters, whether civilian or rookie. And Ayanna didn't just sign papers. She formed the Independent Oversight Committee, comprised of community leaders, human rights activists, and former officers who were forced out for speaking the truth. For the first time, a door was opened to those who had been silenced for far too long. Every week, Ayanna set aside 1 hour to personally hear feedback from department staff. No microphones, no assistants, no official minutes, just listening. If you can't speak the truth to the person in charge, she told them, then we'll forever be a fractured force. Those who once laughed at her now sat quietly at the back of the meeting room. They weren't joking anymore. They were listening, because they too now understood. No one in that room could hide behind a badge or skin color anymore. Ayanna didn't seek revenge. She rebuilt, with the silence of that day, now turned into action. The humiliation she once endured became the hammer that shattered silence and rebuilt trust from the ruins. Not long after the incident, Ayanna Brooks' name appeared in training curricula at the National Police Academy. Not because of her title as Chief of Police, but because of how she changed an entire system with a single punch she never threw back. The Arlington case, as it came to be known, became a defining case study for new recruits. The punch wasn't just misconduct. It was a mirror held up to an entire internal culture. And it was what happened afterward, her calm, her discipline, her decisiveness, that saved an entire department from collapse. A professor at the NYPD Academy put it this way: Ayanna didn't need to shout. She didn't need a press tour to demand justice. She turned humiliation into reform, one step, one command, one policy at a time. An organizational psychologist noted, "The real shock wasn't the punch. It was the chilling silence of the group, and Ayanna, by rising from that silence, forced everyone to face their own conscience." At a national summit on law enforcement reform, Ayanna was invited to deliver the opening address. She kept it short. "I didn't come to retaliate. I came to remind us all, we cannot protect the community if we cannot protect one another in our own house." Thousands rose to their feet in applause, not because she was a black female police chief, but because she made power relearn what it means to show respect. One wrong punch awakened a system that thought it was already right. at the new headquarters of the Arlington Police Department, in the main lobby, just beneath the American flag, a polished metal plaque hangs proudly on the wall. Etched into it are the words Ayanna Brooks handwrote after her first meeting with the new leadership team. Judge no one by their skin, turn a blind eye to no injustice, and never let anyone feel small in the very house they swore to protect. There was no statue, no formal dedication ceremony, just those words, and they became a symbol. On reopening day, hundreds of citizens from every background came to witness it. A 9-year-old black girl held a handmade sign. When I grow up, I want to be a cop, just like Chief Ayanna. A retired Latino officer quietly placed his old badge beneath the plaque. It read, "Thank you for doing what our generation was too afraid to." Inside her office, Ayanna Brooks didn't sit in a luxury leather chair. No walls filled with medals. On her desk sat just one photograph. Her rookie year, in uniform, standing between 3 white officers, her gaze firm, unwavering. She had never forgotten the moments she was dismissed, and she would never forget the colleagues who stayed silent when she needed someone to speak up. Now, she is that voice. And the plaque at the entrance? It is a permanent reminder. We didn't just change the police. We changed the way a system sees people. One woman, one institution, one message. That must never be forgotten.